Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Dirks, and on behalf of ACRL and Choice, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Reviews Journals, a vital library resource for students, faculty, and researchers, which is sponsored by Springer Nature. Today's discussion is one in a series of sponsored webinars from ACRL and Choice that addresses new ideas, developments, and products of interest to the academic library community. Free to users, these structured 60-minute live presentations provide the opportunity for interactive discussions of important new issues and developments in academic librarianship by librarians, vendors, authors, and other interested stakeholders. Before we get started, I'd just like to point out a few features of the webinar system. In the main area of the screen, you should be able to follow along with the presentation materials. Along the right-hand side, you should see a Q&A panel and a chat panel. If you don't, you can click the little arrows on either side of those labels to open and close the panels. Please use the Q&A panel to enter questions for today's speakers. We'll take a little time at the end of the presentation to answer those questions, at least as many as we have time for, so please do send them in throughout. And the chat panel, that's what you can use to message me if you're having any technical difficulties. Please send me a message directly through that little box, and we'll troubleshoot the issue privately. Today, we're using the hashtag ACRL Choice Webinars during the event. So if you've got another screen handy, shout out to us. We're at choice_reviews on Twitter. Also note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archived version. And here to kick things off for us from Springer Nature is Christy Gertzen. So I will turn things over to you, Christy.
Thank you, Mark. On behalf of the Springer Nature team, I'd like to welcome today's guest speakers and all of our attendees who are dialing in today. Just as a brief introduction for those who have joined us, Springer Nature is a global publishing publisher committed to supporting the research community. Springer Nature is home to the leading publishing editorial teams for nature journals, which many of you may be aware of, Springer eBooks and Journals, the Palgrave Macmillan Publishing House, and other leading imprints. Springer Nature has a longstanding relationship with ACRL, and we're delighted to bring you this webinar today with the ACRL team. So in today's webinar, we'll hear from our guest speakers on the topic of our Nature Reviews journals and how these journals are a unique research resource and teaching tool for students, researchers, and faculty. And as Mark mentioned, following today's presentation, we'll open up the webinar to a Q&A session for both guest speakers. Feel free throughout the presentation today to type in your questions in through the chat box, and I'll try and get through to most of the questions as we can today. So today's guest speakers, I'd like to introduce first Jill Adie, Dr. Jill Adie. She's our Senior Publishing Manager for Nature Research in our London office. Jill has her PhD in Structural Biology and a Bachelor's in Science in Pharmacology from the University of Edinburgh. Jill has 9 years of experience in STM publishing, and she currently manages the Nature Reviews journals and all of our Nature new launch titles. Dr. Mina Razzak is joining Jill. Mina is the editorial director for our research reviews portfolio and journals at Nature. Mina holds a degree in biomedical science from Victoria University in New Zealand. She received her PhD in organic chemistry from the University of Cambridge. Mina is instrumental in the management of all of our editorial operations at the Nature Reviews journals here at Springer Nature. So without further ado, I'll pass on the presentation over to Mina and Jill.
Thank you very much, Christy, for the introduction. So I'm just going to continue to the next slide. So first of all, thank you everyone for attending today. It's a real pleasure to come and talk to you about the Nature Reviews journals and the great resource that they are for students and researchers alike. So next slide. So I'm just going to jump straight in today with a poll. So what I'd like to know is, where are you joining us from today? So you can be as detailed as you like with this. So really, I just meant what area are you from, but you could tell me if you're sitting on your sofa or whatever, wherever you are, as we are all in lockdown at the moment. Certainly in the UK we are. And while you let us know where you're joining us from today, I'm going to click to the next slide and give you a quick overview of what we're going to cover. So really, we're going through the what, how, who, and what next of the Nature Reviews Journal, with a couple of examples in there about how our review articles can really bring together different audiences in a collaborative way and make it very accessible to such a wide audience there. Next slide, please. And then once we've almost finished our first poll question, I'm going to ask you another poll question. So how familiar are you with the differences between the Nature Research Journals and the Nature Reviews Journals? So there's a couple of answers there. Yes, I'm familiar with the differences. No, I'm not, or I'm not really sure. We're really interested to see if you do know the differences. And that's actually one of the first things that I'm going to start with. I'm going to go to the next slide, please. And then we'll go through some of your answers from the polls a little bit later on. So just to jump straight in, the differences between the research journals and the reviews journals that Nature publishes. So in the most basic sense, the main difference is the content that each of these two portfolios publishes. So that's, I guess, kind of obvious from the name. The Nature Reviews journals publish reviews, whereas the Nature Research journals publish original research. And because of that very basic difference, they also cater to different but overlapping audiences as well. But of course, it is not as simple as that. It's not as straightforward. So there are some more differences, and I'm just going to talk about them here a little bit more. So the Nature Research journals are a portfolio of about 30 Nature journals, and they, as we've mentioned, published original research, but they do also publish reviews and perspectives. But their main objective is to present the most up-to-date and innovative research. It has to be of the highest quality and impact, and they work with submissions. So authors will submit their work directly to these research journals. And the audiences here are mainly active researchers who are looking for the most up-to-date and cutting-edge research in a particular field at a particular time. So they're very timely. On the other hand, the reviews journals, they share a lot of this. So the audience are also active researchers, but it's also, as we're going to find out more during this presentation, students, but it's also wider than that even. It's also clinicians and patients. The reviews journals do not take submissions, although they do receive unsolicited submissions about reviews, but most of the time these are commissioned. So the editorial team at each journal commission, they prepare a synopsis and they will commission some of the experts within a particular field to write synthesis, to create a review article on that topic. And because they do give an overview of the field, that's what makes it a great teaching tool. One thing they all have in common is that all of the Nature journals have in-house professional editors who read every article, either submitted or commissioned, and it is they who make the final decisions every day on what gets published or not. So on the next slide, I'm going to give a quick overview of the reviews portfolio. And just before I dive into this, I'm going to share with you the answers to the poll. It's about very similar. So I think around the same amount of people were not familiar with the differences between the research journals and the reviews journals that were also not sure, and a smaller number than that were familiar with the differences. So I'm glad that we went through the last slide. If you have any more questions about the differences between the two portfolios, please just drop us a question. I'd be happy to pick that up at the end of the presentation. So here's an overview of the reviews. We have 20 reviews journals at the moment, and they span across the clinical sciences, the life sciences, and the physical sciences. So the clinical sciences used to be called the Nature Clinical Practice titles, but their titles changed in 2009 to Nature Reviews and then whatever that topic will be, so either clinical oncology, endocrinology, or rheumatology, and there are 8 different clinical practices that sit within that group. And then we also have 8 life science journals as well, so these are very well established journals. Some of them are celebrating their 20th anniversary this year, so they have been around for 20 years, some of them. And then our physical sciences group within here. So the physical sciences are mostly our new launches. So as you can see, the launch years next to these journals. So we've got a 2016, we had Nature Reviews Materials. 2017 was Chemistry, 2019 was Physics, and then in January this year we had Nature Reviews Earth and Environment. Very exciting. So for within the Nature Reviews portfolio, we hadn't really ventured into the physical sciences before. So in 2016 with Nature Reviews Materials, it was quite an exciting time to expand out into that. And we found that the reviews within the physical sciences are very well read and very well cited. And we've had very, very good feedback from expanding into that area. So what I want to say about these reviews journals as well is that each journal has its own personality or journal voice. So while they do all cover different topics and serve different research communities, they also, each one of them is independent in that it has a journal voice, which is often expressed in, say, the editorials or the comments on topics that are important to their different research communities. Now, one journal in particular I'd like to pull out is Nature Reviews Drug Discovery. They also are able to very rapidly publish research highlights and other news content, so they have a very strong journalistic side to their journal as well. Whereas the other journals have less of that, but they still do publish research highlights and news. But Nature Reviews Drug Discovery really does that very, very well and has quite a lot of that content as well. Next slide, please.
Right, so as Jill mentioned, all the nature journals have in-house professional editors, but what does that really mean? Well, we can look at a lot of different job roles of the teams. These include manuscript editors. These are the editors who spend most of their time assessing the manuscripts or editing the manuscripts, the research papers, and the review. Jill mentioned Nature Reviews Drug Discovery is having a lot of magazine content. For that, we have magazine editors, but several of our research titles also have a large magazine portion, including Nature Biotech. To help make the manuscripts very polished, we have a great team of copy editors, art editors, and production editors who will check our language, lay out the articles beautifully, and have the graphic design come to life. And we would be nothing without our editorial administrative support who help us manage these papers and correspond with our authors. So I wanted to take you a little bit deeper into the publishing process at Nature Reviews in particular. So I mentioned we have a large team of in-house professionals, and for Nature Reviews and the 20 titles, that's a team of more than 100 people. So the life of a Nature Reviews article typically starts with a commission. An editor will reach out to a potential author with an idea for writing a brand new review. They'll work together to scope out the article and decide which findings need to be included, the angle a particular article will take, and then the authors will go ahead and write that paper. When it comes in, the editor will provide comprehensive feedback. And the kinds of things that we look at here are whether the data included are complete, whether the ideas are solid, the organization of the manuscript, and the display items. You may know that Nature Reviews is famous for its artwork, and the editors start right at the beginning of the process to work on designing those figures to explain very complex processes with our authors. Once the authors have revised the manuscript based on that initial feedback, we send the manuscripts out to peer review. For us, peer review is a very constructive process, and we specifically ask the reviewers to consider the overall balance, the scientific accuracy, and also to give ideas on how to even better enhance the paper. When the authors have taken those comments on board, the detailed edit happens, and this is the point where the editor goes line by line, interrogating every detail of the manuscript, making sure clauses are complete and comparators are there. We also, at this point, we engage with our art editors who turn our sometimes scruffy drafts into beautiful works of art. After that, the manuscript is ready for acceptance. Our copy editors, our proofreaders, and our production editors turn the manuscript, which can be an unwieldy Word document in many cases, into a beautiful laid out magazine piece. After it's published, we don't stop there. Our marketing teams and our editors disseminate the publication, make sure the community is aware that it exists, and hopefully grab our readers. So all of this work and all the work of all the team members produces an article that is authoritative, balanced and reliable, accessible to a wide range of readers. And the feedback that we've had from our authors and our readers is that these make excellent teaching tools. I've had a number of my authors over the years tell me that they've used their article as a teaching resource for their university students.
So as Mina just mentioned, the reviews are a really excellent educational tool. There's two reasons for that. Not only because the review articles themselves are set up for this, but also the platform that they're on. So I'm going to talk through both of these things here and give you some examples. So first of all, as you can see on this slide, number 1, it says glossary. Each of our review articles has a glossary of terms within the article, so this is really useful as an explainer for people who are new to the field, for example, or someone brushing up on a topic. Some of our editorial teams do take this even further. For example, Nature Reviews Genetics tweets key take-home messages as a thread when the review article is first published. And Rheumatology also started doing tweetorials for selected articles where they produce a thread of tweets related to the article's key points along with some related images. So this really helps either students or perhaps a postdoc who's switching labs. They need to quickly brush up on a topic, and it helps them to not only find the right content, also understand the key terms within that content. As far as our platform goes, we have a dedicated product and user experience team at Nature Research, and they look after all the article web pages. So what they do is they spend time researching, spending time with the research community, and understand how researchers work, discover and use the content for their work, rather. And so we've developed these things, so numbers 2 and 3 here. So number 2 is a reading companion. So while you're reading the article on the web page as an HTML, a reading companion will glide down the page next to the reader. It helps you navigate between sections very easily, but also if there's a particular figure that you'd like to look at, so you could read about that figure, but also have the figure open on the right-hand side of the screen as a reference point while you read about it. Similarly for the references, so you can see there's a third tab there on the slide that says references. So if you wanted to check out a particular reference, that could also appear on the right-hand side of the screen while you're reading the main text of the article. And thirdly, what I've put here are discovery tools. So these are twofold. So associated content. So if the article that a reader is accessing is actually part of a collection or a series or a special issue, that will appear within the associated content. This is actually at the top right hand of the screen. You can see it actually above the reading companion on part 2. That's where it normally sits. So it's very visible and very easy to click through and see all the other related content to that. And there's another discovery tool that we have as well. So this is subjects. And this is usually at the bottom of the article in the HTML. And if you click on one of the subjects, so there are keywords used for a particular review. And if you click on one of the subjects down there, it will take you to a search of all articles which have that as a key term within the Nature journal. So it's a very quick and easy way to find other content. Yep, so I'm actually, I'm definitely on the next slide now. Anyway, that's fine. So one of the things I wanted to pick up, so Springer Nature is a very innovative publisher. It's a great place to work because of that, because we have the freedom to work on various innovations that we feel will really help the research community. may have heard this has been press released that Springer Nature are involved in seamless access with RA21. And another thing that we're doing at the moment to make sure that our readers access our content from home or when they're working remotely, when they're not on campus at any rate, is working very hard behind the scenes to make sure that they can continue to do that through cookies. So that's something that is a top priority for us at the moment. And I thought I would mention that because of the current situation that we're all under. But that's everything I wanted to mention as an innovative publisher. Now what I'd like to move on to is talking about how research is evolving. And that means how our publications are evolving as well. So just to start this off, research is evolving and becoming more collaborative. So we all know this. That means it's becoming more complex and involves many more disciplines. So what I'm trying to say here is that any research project at any one time is now includes many more disciplines than it did, say, 20 years ago. And so the way I've looked at it here is, this is actually adapted from a paper you can see at the bottom of the screen, Sustainability in 2011. So looking at the number of mentions of multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, or transdisciplinary in articles in Web of Science. And the numbers aren't huge, but what you can see is that it's increasing. So there's a lot more awareness, not only of this type of working, but also people are doing it a lot more. And we can also see that through looking at what's being published. So this is really true for research that's related to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. But also any research that will address any kind of global challenge or important societal need. So any research that needs to address those kind of things, in order to have the biggest impact, it needs to pull together lots of different disciplines because you need to provide a holistic perspective on that and a real-world impact so that it's useful and usable by policy makers, and I've written policy influencers here as well. So what I'd like to go through over the next couple of slides are some examples of how reviews can do this too. So normally we see multidisciplinary working and an original research paper coming out of a research project, but I'd like to show you that we can also see this in reviews articles as well. And some of this will pull out why the Nature reviews are quite unique in this space, because we can publish very multidisciplinary review articles where maybe other competitors don't. So the first example I'd like to talk about comes from our new launch. So Nature Reviews Earth and Environment was launched in January this year. We are very excited about this journal. So there is a huge societal interest in environmental degradation, of course, at the moment. We are all very aware about climate change, plastic pollution, land use change, and sustainability. So there is a need for an all-encompassing journal that will span all of those things, the full diversity of geoscience topics, and include social science. So this example just shows exactly that. So it's a review that discusses the impact of sea level rise. Now, sea level rise is very important. Many journals will publish on sea level rise. That is not unique to Nature Reviews Earth and Environment, but we've also taken into account human migration, the effects of sea level rise on human migration. And in order to do this, we needed to bring together the threads of sociology, politics, population studies, food policy, and law with earth and environmental sciences. So it was actually the broad scope of this journal that allows us to bring all of this together and publish this review. And as I mentioned, other earth and environment reviews journals may publish something on sea level rise, but they wouldn't have brought in the human migration element, so that social science element wouldn't necessarily have been covered. This is very meaningful. It has a real life impact, and it shows that not just Nature Reviews Earth and Environment, but the Nature Reviews as a whole portfolio and the Nature journals have convening power. They can bring together different people to create these multidisciplinary reviews, which have real life impact.
That's right, Jill. So I wanted to share with you another couple of examples about this interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary approach that the Nature Reviews journals take. So Nature Reviews Microbiology is one of our well-established titles. I think it celebrated its 15th birthday recently, maybe even older than that. So a typical microbiology review will look at the pathogens, and in this case, the host pathogen interactions and crosstalk. That's a very life science-y, basic science approach to looking at microbes. In this case, in this article, we were specifically looking at those interactions in the context of UTI, or urinary tract infections. What was interesting about this paper is that they were able to take those host pathogen interface interactions to explain the pathophysiology of UTIs, but also show how this information can be translated into clinical treatments for UTIs. So that's really showing that sort of classic bench to bedside approach that medicine today is all about. And another example from Nature Review's Disease Primers, this article we published earlier this year on opioid use disorder, which I'm sure you are all aware of, and that it's a very big health problem in the United States in particular, but also other countries such as Iran. So in this article, like all primer articles, we covered the epidemiology of OUD and the biological and social mechanisms underlying the development of this disorder. The figure here that I've pulled up shows a proposed method for treating people with opioid use disorder, which before this primer had been published wasn't available. We were able to bring together a distinguished panel of authors to put this information in an easy-to-read format and make it available for healthcare workers and social care workers in a way that just never been done before. Now, aside from the long-form reviews and primers that we've given some examples of, the Nature Reviews journal published a variety of content, which really speaks to the breadth of our scope and also how many people we can capture. So I've listed a couple of examples here, including bio-business briefs, which have a much more pharmaceutical industry or biotech industry focus, and these are published by Nature Reviews Drug Discovery. Prime views, of which you can see an example in the bottom right here for Ebola virus disease. These are visual summaries of our long-form articles, and they're aimed at patients to provide succinct, easy-to-digest information for people who may have the condition or who may be interested in starting to research it. We have, as Jill mentioned earlier, some news-type content along the lines of news and briefs, comments, or opinion articles. We have research highlights as well. We have other long-form reviews, like technical reviews, which Nature Reviews Physics publishes, which really looks into the nitty-gritty of some techniques. And of course, we welcome correspondence from all our readers. So I hope that gives you a good overview of our content. I'll take it over to Jill now.
Oh, sorry. I was muted. I would just like to try and do another couple of poll questions. I'm really interested to hear about whether you have any demand from your patrons for Nature Reviews journals, but also for reviews journals in general. Is this something that you get asked for a lot, requests for? So the polls should be popping up just now. And another question as well on open access. So how important is it to you or your users that review articles are open access? So we talk about original research articles being open access a lot. There's a lot of research funders that mandate that original research should be open access, but this doesn't typically cover review articles. So that's something that we'd like to find out a little bit more about. So while we give you some time to fill in the polls, and I will share the answers with you as well, I think we could probably take a couple of questions if there have been some questions. So Christy or Mark, do you have had some questions coming in?
Hi, I was just unmuting myself. Sorry for the delay, everybody. We did have one question come through. There was an inquiry about any nursing-related reviews or journals, or the nursing audience, if you want to speak to that specifically.
Yeah. You want to take that? Yep.
Yeah, I can take that. So while we don't have any journal that formally covers nursing, so Nature Reviews Nursing, for example, a lot of our clinical titles do cover issues related to nursing because they have a strong clinical aspect to them. So for example, we have recruited RNs to write for us. I'm thinking specifically in the very surgical fields like urology and cardiology. You may find some nursing relevant content there.
Great, thanks, Mina. We have one more question. Can you comment on use of quote unquote systematic review methods in Nature Reviews journals?
That's a great question. So actually we take more of a narrative review approach rather than a systematic review approach. Systematic reviews tend to be a little bit more method heavy, and for our view, we consider those to be more original research than a review article.
Great, thanks. One more question, if we can. We are a community college, and there is an initiative to have undergrads that are underrepresented do real research. Are these at a level for first-year undergrads? Also, does it cover any social science research?
That's another great question. So the different journals have certainly published content that is accessible for undergrad level. Some of it is a little bit more technical, but the reviews editors in general try to consider undergraduates and early postgrads as their key audience. A really good journal that does this very well is Nature Reviews Disease Primers. They consider their main audience to be medical students. So, undergrad absolutely covers that. I'm sorry, the second part of the question was about social sciences?
Yes. Does it cover any social science research?
So our strongest journal in that area is Nature Reviews Earth and Environment, as Jill had mentioned. We don't have a behavioral science reviews journal, although we do cover some psychology topics in Nature Reviews Disease Primers and Nature Reviews Neurology. Jill, do you have anything to add there?
No, I think you've covered it with that, actually.
That's those are the questions that I see in the chat. Oh, actually, I take that back. We have one more question that came in. Since these reviews are multidisciplinary, would they be helpful for One Health initiatives and interprofessional education, especially in the areas of simulation?
Well, certainly in terms of health, the interdisciplinary aspects of medicine are apparent. A single patient with a single disorder typically sees more than one specialist. So certainly from the medical perspective, the clinical journals, they are definitely interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and they promote multidisciplinary teams within medicine. In terms of simulation, I think the most, I would say, modeling heavy journal would be Nature Reviews Physics.
Just checking if we have more questions coming through the chat. For any of those on, if you have questions for Mina or Jill, feel free to put them in the chat box, and we'll get to those questions as they come in.
Just to give a quick update on the polls, if you guys would like. So we asked, how important is it to you or your patrons that reviews are open access? And we've got quite a lot of people say it is important. I can't see the percentage on here, so I'll just try and spot that. 30%, yeah. Thank you very much for those who filled in the polls. It's really interesting to know. And then we asked, do you see demand directly from your patrons for reviews journals, either the Nature Reviews or any reviews journals? And we say yes, some, about 17%. I don't know is about 10%. Not very much is 11%. None at all, 2%. And yes, a lot, 3%. And then there's a lot that haven't answered as well. just in case you're wondering why that didn't add up to 100.
I think we'll give it a few more minutes for any questions that might come in.
A couple of questions here about the distinction between trans, inter, and multi flavors of collaboration, which we can cover. Although I'm certainly not the expert on this, but I can give you a very brief update on that, if you like. Is that the only question I've got? Yeah. So ultimately, the basic principle across all of those approaches is similar. So you're focusing on a complex problem, solving that complex problem by crossing sort of disciplinary boundaries. But there are very subtle differences between the terms. So while they're similar, there are subtle differences. And you shouldn't use them interchangeably, but unfortunately, they are used interchangeably quite a lot, particularly multi and interdisciplinary, I find. So there's sort of three levels. So at the top, you'd have multidisciplinary, and then slightly more integrated, you'd get interdisciplinary, and then slightly more integrated than that, you get transdisciplinary. Although for my definitions, I'd say transdisciplinary is slightly different, and I'll explain why in just a second. So with multidisciplinary, you're looking at a subject, particularly a problem, rather, which is approached from different angles using different disciplinary perspectives. But you don't generate any new integrative knowledge. So you get what you end up with is expert opinions from various disciplines on this issue, whereas interdisciplinary is slightly more integrated. So you'd have exactly the same. So you'd have a subject approach from different angles. This is normally where you'd have a real-world system problems, and you do generate new integrative knowledge. So you're crossing boundaries to create that new knowledge. And then transdisciplinary is the level further. And usually that means you're including non-academics in that research as well. So that could be the general public, or it could be an NGO. Yeah, and that's just taking it that bit further. So you're getting a much more holistic picture with transdisciplinary, depending on what you're looking at. So that's how I normally define it. I think there are some slightly different levels of definition, but hopefully that gave you a brief overview.
I actually see a question here.
Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, I see a question here regarding Nature Reviews Physics and whether editors recruit content by monitoring archive or other preprint servers. The answer to that is no, not really. Most of our editors, as Jill mentioned, actively commission authors to write, and that involves the editor doing their own independent research, attending conferences to get an idea of where the research field is heading, and then scoping out before inviting an author to write.
Thanks, Mina. I have two questions here. The first one, are there any other review publications in the works for the near future that you can speak of?
Yeah, so we do have some new launches. So at the moment, we've got a few new launches pegged for January 2021. We haven't got around to announcing them yet, so that will be just a matter of weeks before we announce those titles. But I can let you know that one of them will be a review.
Thanks, Jill. I have another question here. Since I'm at the beginning of my research career, I would be interested if you can provide any workshops on academic writing, article structure, and content research methodologies in the fields.
So actually, strangely, Nature Research does provide this kind of education. I used to work in that department, so I know about it. They're called the Nature Masterclasses, and you can access them online. One of them is free. That's the course on peer review, and the other ones they are fee paying, but they cover quite a wide variety of topics on there, and they're led by Nature journal editors. So we can send you the link to that afterwards if you'd like.
We have a participant interested in obtaining the slides that you used during the webinar. Are you both okay to share those?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And just to all of the attendees that are still with us, feel free to enter any questions that you might have in the general chat box, or you can send those directly to Mina or Jill. Following the close of this webinar, the recording of this webinar will be sent out in addition to some information about our seamless access. We have a new podcast that talks about seamless access to nature.com. And also we have 2 webinars coming up for the library community about remote access challenges and solutions for libraries, as many libraries and universities have moved to virtual environments in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. So just wanted to make you guys aware of that.
Excellent. This is Mark. Yeah, this is Mark from ACRL. I'll just say thank you so much, Christy and Mina and Jill, for your time today. We appreciate your taking the time to walk us through the reviews journals and explain really a lot of information about just every aspect of it. So we really appreciate that. For those out there listening in, sorry to step on you. My apologies there. For those listening in, we appreciate your taking the time to participate in the webinar today. And if you have a few extra moments there, if you could let us know how we did. You should see a link to a survey in your chat box there. We'd really appreciate your feedback. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope you will join us again soon. Bye-bye.